Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like we are live. And so it's noon, Wednesday, the 25th. I'm so excited to be joined by what I would consider great friends, certainly great innovators in our industry. So welcome, guys. I'm gonna give us all a minute to kind of get settled. I appreciate we've had a little bit of chat and tried to like stop some of the conversation so we can make sure we get it out here for the masses. So thank you so much for taking your time. For those that are in the ecosystem that follow either what little I put out on social media or where my head's at in different components. If you see me running around the Tampa Bay area, they probably know that I have some affinity around this mental health conversation. And what's interesting is that from my seat, I was actually sharing with the group that I'm more excited because in the last 90 days, I've seen more people around me, leaders in our community. I actually had a friend come up and say to me, "Hey, Dennis, are you part of a men's group? I think that really does a lot for my mental health." And he brought that attention to me, which, I certainly have a fantastic men's group. I know, Ryan, that's a big component for your business and really I would say, it's not really a piece of my business. It's basically a lifestyle. I have a group of guys that I lean on in different capacities. So from my seat, I'm excited to see there's a focus on men's mental health. Today's conversation was really it stems from some conversations that my good friend Dr. Mehra and I have frequently in our community. It's that mental health is something I think we're all acutely aware of. I think we, kind of set a baseline here, and someone's welcome to argue with me if you want or debate. But we're all acutely aware of the problem. It's been a big problem in my situation. I started paying really close attention to it in 2019. Then we all dealt with 2020. So COVID came on and threw fuel on the fire, right? So everyone then became really aware of it. I found a lot of employers all of a sudden were concerned about mental health, some capacity. Some of it, I think, was for our overall well-being. Some of it was, hey, if I can't keep people on the job, I can't operate as an organization. So I think that was a big component. But every time I was asking Dr. Mehra, hey, like, am I just ignorant? I don't know that I know what to do. And I'm supposed to be an expert in this healthcare field. I'm building health plans. And I would go to experts, guys, and, tell me if I'm wrong, if you've had this experience. But I would raise my hand and say, hey, I'm publicly educated in the Kentucky system, so maybe I just don't know. But what are you doing to solve for mental health? And I got three very distinct answers. One was they would stutter. That was the biggest one. The second one was they might say EAP or telepsych now, I think is pretty common. And then the third one was by far, if they could change the conversation and walk away, that could just be personal. It might have just been me, you guys, but I saw a lot of people that just didn't know how to answer it. So they don't want to talk about it. And I see that happening in our entire country in many cases. There still is, as much as I think stigma and these things have been brought to our attention, stigma is still alive and well. I would make that bold statement. But I would tell you, I could show you multiple statistics. And in spite of everything, in spite of all the money, I did an analysis and found that 200 billion plus is kind of thrown at this wellness industry that includes mental health. And I just don't see the statistics going down. I see many of them on the rise. And so my concern is, and I posted something about this a month or so ago, but you could go do this today. If you go type into Google any word, any phrase, it will pre-populate with the most popular things, right? The one word that doesn't come up when you type in mental health and pre-population is prevention. And so I really wanted to point out, Doc laid out last year, he basically April 25th, right, Doc, if I remember correctly, was Action Over Awareness Month. And it's this thing that, hey, we know there's a problem, but what are we doing about it? We just went through Mental Health Awareness Month. We all probably sat in webinars, sat in meetings, sat in community events talking about mental health, fundraisers for mental health, big month for that. But my question now that we're past it, and that's why I brought you guys together, was ultimately, are we moving the needle? Are we doing anything that's having an impact? And more importantly, can we do anything around it? So I'm going to stop there for 1 second and just say, can we all agree that the stats are up and it's hundreds of billions of dollars going into it? And if we just measure pure ROI on that point, I would say many people would be fired, right? Just look at the ROI. So now that it's over, like, what have we learned? So I still think there's a significant gap between kind of awareness and action. I even had one of my good friends with the state chamber said, Dennis, I think we're in love with the problem. So my goal today was to create some awareness around the organizations that you guys are operating in. And I know you have good ideas on this topic. So I'm going to step back and shut up a minute and just start asking questions. But first, I want to introduce each one of you. So if you guys don't mind, take a second. And I see you on the screen. I don't know if everybody's got the same format, but I'm going to start with you, Dr. Mehra. Would you just tell us who you are and what company you represent? And tell me something interesting about you that no one would find if they Google searched you. I think that'll be helpful as well.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you. And Dennis, thank you so much for putting together such great minds of people who are sincerely trying to help humanity. That's really the first premise is, do people care? So my name is Dr. Rahul Mehra by training and background. I'm a board certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I've been in practice a little bit over 35 years. I am the creator and founder of Emotional Vaccines. And an interesting fact about me is I visited all 7 continents.
Ooh, that's a good.
All right. Born by the Taj Mahal, in the shadow of the Taj Mahal. I don't know if that's accurate, but I know you were born where the Taj Mahal's at.
Yes,
so
sir.
I think that's
Sure
maybe
was.
not the shadow, but it's a big building. So thank you, Doc. Doc is a very
It sounds
good
dramatic,
close.
Dennis, so that's good.
Yeah. He's a very good, close personal friend, but he's born and raised in Gaffney, South Carolina, just so you know. So we jokingly say he's the only Hindu Baptist you'll probably ever run into. And so it's a great hometown that he's from. And so anyway, interesting story. I do tell people all the time, if you don't like my Indian Hindu Baptist friend, then I don't know where I'm going to find another one like him. So, all right, Reed, please jump in. You and I have been running around and you've probably been on more webinars than anybody I know, you and Ryan as my guest. So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. My name's Reed Rasmussen. In 2009, I founded a company called Fresh Bennies. And you're right, I have been on a lot of webinars because in 2009, we started selling remotely and working our company remotely and working across the country, selling via the web. So yeah, I've been on a few tens of thousands of webinars.
I can only imagine.
As a company, we collect various cost containment tools together. And for the past 8 years, behavioral telehealth has been one of those. And for the past 3 years, we really sort of built a modern version of what that is that had unlimited visits, unlimited cost to the member. And so our usage level and our experience and testimonials with helping people through mental health issues has dramatically grown, especially in the last few years. And something unique about me, I grew up in the Canadian Rockies. My first job was working for my father, cutting Christmas trees.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, I did not know that. That's great. That's great. Well, I very much, Reed is the gentleman that is very heavily embedded in my industry, hangs out with a lot of the people that I respect. I primarily reached out to him because when I was asking, hey, what are you doing? Because he's got an incredible marketing team, incredible organization, great mind. I've seen him speak multiple times. And so Reed was one that I was counting on is going to help solve for this. And so there's a major component that I think using the traditional models that we have, those pieces, there's a lot of things in the traditional space that are working and work well, but we need to know that we can count on the people that are behind the scenes. And that's really where I trust Reed's not going to put anything on his platform that he doesn't trust and hasn't validated. And so I wanted to bring him in because I think access to care is one of the things that's actually gotten better. We can actually reach out and talk to people now. Now, is it better for face-to-face? Certainly. Like, I think you read certain cues, but some of the telepsych I think that's out there is good. I also have been concerned, and this is one thing that Reed can probably speak to later, but I've been concerned that if telepsych is just handing out more medications, it's going to make the problem worse. That's my theory. I'm not a scientist, but that's my theory. So I wanted to really bring someone in that I think can speak to it with some authority and not just Dennis's opinions. So thirdly, I've got Ryan Miller is a perfect testament to the power of social media. I don't know that I would know Ryan otherwise. I was fortunate enough. I saw his book came out. I finally got around to listening to his book, and I literally called him that afternoon because I couldn't put it down. It's unbelievable. The story's unbelievable. So I'm going to save anybody I'm not going to give you any of the punchlines. You'll have to talk to Ryan, and you should read the book. So Wounds is incredible. The first chapter is riveting as any book I've ever read, Ryan. And I know you probably didn't set out in life to be an author. I don't know if that was one of your life goals, but that was an incredible first chapter, and I was hooked. And so I wanted to bring you in because you consult a lot of us that are in my position, right? So I think that stuttering or changing the conversation, you're probably the most used to on things they don't want to talk about. So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, so Ryan James Miller. I am a performance coach to executive leaders, entrepreneurs, business founders, and I'm here by complete accident or maybe divine intervention, I think. And I don't necessarily mean here on this panel as much as I didn't experience my first mental health crisis until I was 40 years old. And that was the result of a post-traumatic event. I found myself curled up in the corner of my office, literally in a ball crying, and I had no idea what was going on. And I realized that I had never been given a single tool to deal with the emotional and mental trauma that I had faced from 6 years old until 40. And so while I'm typically hired and working to help individuals and organizations generate more revenue, I find that every bit of opportunity to optimize an individual and organization is found deep inside the individual that is serving that organization. And so I try to spend as much time as I can extracting those challenges from those individuals where their brokenness lies, helping them to heal, and then ultimately, helping them to optimize and perform at a higher level. And so I'm honored to be here. I feel like the good doc there, starts spitting out credentials, and I'm like, well, I don't deserve to be talking with that guy. And Reed's been at this, for a couple of decades, and so I'm like, well, I don't deserve to be here with that guy. And so, Ryan, can you please set the bar a little bit lower so I feel like I can contribute to the rest of this conversation? And you can't, so I guess here I am.
I don't know about that. I think that's a perfect segue to my intro as by far the least credentialed one of the group. But Ryan Nolin, I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I work for an organization called Sword Health, and they have predominantly been a player in the MSK, musculoskeletal space. But over the last 18 months, and actually the reason that I joined the organization was to help develop a new program called Mind. It was just released, big press announcement last week, but this has been a very strategic move for our company into the mental health, mental fitness space. And what we offer, and I'm happy to go into more detail, but I won't take up too much time on the front end, is when we think about traditional care pathways today, right? It's you can go out and get a prescription, or you can go to talk therapy. And there's a lot of folks that are actively choosing not to do those things, and they just white knuckle through. And we've developed a program that is very effectively touching a group that otherwise would not be seeking help. And we're doing some pretty unique things with wearables and AI. Our pricing model, tied to outcomes. So some super cool stuff there. But I joined that because I have a personal passion for it. I have been through my own mental, health journey. And, Ryan, I know you mentioned it hit you at 40. I don't know if I'm lucky or unlucky that, it hit me at a little bit earlier point. But very similar. I don't think that I understood it, as a 28-year-old male. And it took several years for me to put the tools in my toolkit. And so I've got a healthcare background. I've worked with HR executives at Fortune 500 companies. And so I've got a background that lends itself very well, but what really drove me to Mind was personal passion for it.
Yeah, I think what stood out to me, we'll call him Senior Nolan so we don't get the Ryans mixed up. What stood out to me was he started talking about we don't pay for it unless there's proof in an outcome. And that to me is probably one of the most revolutionary things I've heard around mental health, right? It literally, the governor, I sat in a press conference this morning where they're signing new mental health legislation. And that's one of the things that he said. He said, when we build a bridge, people know what we're doing. It's very obvious, very tangible. But, when we support mental health, it's harder to read the outcomes. Dr. Mehra said early in my relationship with him that mental wounds don't bleed, right? So, but when you've got an organization and that is doing something that's on the forefront, I just thought we've got to get the word out and help them get the word out, because I think that's incredible. Because I believe after all my work that I've done with Dr. Mehra, one of the answers is these things are not expensive and not complex. They're actually fairly simple. They're just sometimes hard to execute. But I was very impressed with what I saw with Mind, and so just want to bring it in. I think Benefits Pro, if I'm not mistaken, their podcast this week is about, how do we continually innovate, and it's just a interesting conversation. So I think you guys are all innovators. So all right, well, let's jump in. So let's talk a little bit about we in some of the conversations early, like what is the hidden cost of not taking action? And I'll kind of throw that out to any of you. Like what if we do nothing, right? Do we have to change it? Does the status quo matter? And can we just keep doing what we're doing, or why do we need to adjust? Who wants to jump in first?
Well, excuse me, the hidden cost impacts every walks of life. It doesn't matter if you're an employee, a CEO, or you're in the 12th grade, or you're an athlete. The emotional state permeates every dimension of life, whether it's relationships, whether it's academic performance, whether it's job readiness, all those things. And the fundamental need is that education of that, rather than it being viewed as a silo where, okay, well, mental health is over there with the therapist and the psychiatrist and the medications. While we need all of them, we need to make that correlation that the impact of that is what really ties us all together. There's an emotional connection already, even though we are all virtual, but given everything that's been shared, and I will further share with my fellow panelists, is that respectfully, is yes, while I may be the one that has the most credentials, it's each of you that have the most powerful impact that you can have. And you all are already doing that.
So Ryan, Ann, you guys are using wearables, you're using track of, you've got, I'm sure there's some funding somewhere in there. So somebody's looking at the data, right? Has anybody made the connection between, if I don't deal with stress here, it's going to end up here in my claims data? Like, how much of that do you guys spend time looking at?
Yeah, I'm sure our health economics team could give you a more, eloquent answer, but absolutely. I mean, I think there's a very clear tie to the longer this stuff hangs around investors, it's absolutely showing up in your claims data. And when you get ahead of it, we see pretty clear ROI going through thousands and thousands of claims and validated ROI when you're addressing this in the mild to moderate category versus letting it get to that more severe category. So it's definitely showing up in the data.
Reed, you do a lot of care navigation, right? You work with a lot of advisors that are paying attention to those data. Like, what are they sharing with you?
Yeah, we did a lot of analysis over the years on what's the cost to medical claims. Because when you're talking to an employer about why they should invest in this, why they should care, you need to hit them in the pocketbook. And if you do, then you have a whole channel that will help be a promoter of encouraging better health. So we studied a lot of different surveys. Here's the short answer. An employee who has an unmet mental health need will cost $4,000 more in medical claims every single year. And that plays out in a few different ways. But if you just remember that, it's costing $4,000 for everybody who's not dealing with a mental health issue this year in medical claims. So therefore, by dealing with that, what it does is it brings you budget, and it brings you leverage with employers to install better programs that actually get some results. And you may say, how's that possible? Well, 82% of people with an unmet mental health need are showing up in the emergency room at times. It's showing up in extra claims. When they do end up in the emergency room, then it's dramatic times, it's prescriptions, it's at times surgeries. Mental health is the biggest driver of disability claims. That isn't medical claims, it's even outside of that. It's the biggest driver of PTO. It's one of the biggest drivers of workers' comp claims. And so there's a lot of implications. Here's why this really matters though, because half the people who have a mental health issue this year, they will not deal with it. Right, Dr. Mehra? They will sit on it
Right.
and not deal with it. Right, Ryan? They will sit
Yeah.
on it, sit on it, and sit on it. And it's literally years before they actually deal with it. So we're not talking about some small portion of the population. We're talking about how can we help get some help to people earlier rather than later.
I
I think you I
Go
think
ahead,
you bring
Ryan.
up a really good point too, Reed. Because you touched on something uh, when you pushed outside of just the medical spend or medical claim issue, which I think is so incredibly important. I mean, the CEO, even your CFO, they actually don't care that much about medical spend outside of about 6 weeks pre and post renewal. But the rest of the year, that business is being negatively impacted by the poor mental health of every single employee that works for that organization. And Reed alluded to that. I mean, you think about typically an employee's poor performance is not the result of a lack of will, desire, or even skill. It's because something traumatic, negative is happening outside the workplace, which is typically at home, that is inhibiting their ability to be able to professionally succeed in the workplace. And we've talked so much about like, employers need to better understand their employees, but I think employers fear having this conversation with an employee for sake of crossing some forbidden line that really doesn't even exist anymore. Anyway, so I say all that because the audience that's probably going to listen today are producers, benefits consultants, and they have to stop addressing this issue primarily around medical spend. I think it's really important to do it, but it is a fraction of what that executive team actually cares about. That executive team cares about its ability to be able to continue to produce the widget or the service deliver to a customer. If they can't consistently drive revenue, they have no business. If they can't keep butts in the seats to do that, they have no business. And so these benefits consultants need to get, don't take this in a derogatory way, but they need to get smarter around the questions they're asking and how they're penetrating this conversation with the executive team so they can start to uncover the real problems that are happening here and how to solve for those.
All right, so that brings me to one question. So if you're Ryan Miller, I'm going to throw this one back to you because I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you guys, and I'm thinking, all right, so if I'm a CFO and let's say some HR director, because we do have some of them on the registration, I saw for sure, and that's some of the community I play around in here a lot, and they do care about this stuff, but they'll tell you that NAMI says it's going to take 10 or 11 years before I'm going to have a symptom and I'll actually reach out for therapy, right? Chances are someone in your circle noticed your behavior change or something adjusted. Very likely is your employer when you don't show up to work or your hygiene changes or you act out at work out of character, right? All of those things when we're at high stress levels. So if you know that, right, or maybe you've learned that, maybe you don't know anything about it, but how do you get a business or a chief human resource officer or a CFO, somebody who does make the decision to figure out or make a change or do something different, right? How do you get them to feel like, hey, we can empower you to do something? How do you move it from just it's a problem, but I can't fix it?
I mean, I would go back to what Dr. Mira said, and I don't know if this was even directed specifically at me, Dennis, but I think that we need to stop being so reactive in dealing with this issue, and we need to understand that there are proactive tools available. I mean, Dennis, you just said it too. This is not for self-promotion, just because I discovered this. I mean, I was writing my book, and as I'm telling these stories of all these traumatic events, my parents' divorce, my own near failed marriage, addiction, trauma from a mass shooting, like all these things, my coach on the publishing team said, what are you going to give people to actually help them process these things for themselves? And I was like, I don't know. And she says, well, how did you do it? And so as I started to explain it, they actually gave me the framework that ended up at the end of each chapter in my book, which was like, I have to help people start with just acknowledging the fact that they have trauma, hurt, heartache in their life. Because I think that in the workforce, I'll just give you a quick example and then I'm going to be quiet. One of my clients is a large publicly traded tech firm back in Florida. They're global, but they're corporate out of Florida, and they have a full-time counselor, mental health counselor on staff that most of the team will not touch because they are afraid of the stigma that would be associated with them having a challenge. And so they don't even want to acknowledge the fact that they have a struggle. And so I think that as an HR team, you've got to find ways to give your employees permission to acknowledge the fact that they are hurting, that they are struggling, that their fight with their spouse last night is a real issue that's going to negatively impact their ability to work. Be empathetic. You don't have to give permission for people to slack, but you've got to be empathetic to the fact and give them the tools to understand and admit that they're going through these challenges.
I don't think, I think it's important to recognize that none of us are above it. I think I posted when I was promoting this event, I was actually with a friend, client, and he said, you need to read this book. I don't want to talk about it. And so I was listening to the audio version of it. And honestly, I found myself doing the exact same thing. Like I'm hearing this and I'm like, man, why am I listening to this? Like, this isn't me. And then I started hearing a couple more things and I'm like, maybe this is me. Like, I mean, and I'm, none of us are immune to it, right? Brandy and I were married, we were married 18 years, I would say. Then we got divorced and we've had a really great 10, 12 years since, right? We're almost getting close to 30 years now. But, Ryan, I could hear in some of your story things that I know I went through with Brandy. And I wouldn't begin to tell you that I had any, mental health issues, but I had some of the behaviors that everyone uses to cope with mental health issues. So if that tells you anything, I was reacting, right? And I got the fortune of leading an addiction recovery group for 3 years through my church. And what I tell people all the time is when I went into that role, I had no idea what I was doing. They just needed me to open the door, lead the discussion. But I really thought my first reaction was like, what do I know about addiction? And also our church, like you're not supposed to be drinking or smoking. We actually have an addiction program. Turns out it's a pretty big program. There's a lot of people in it because everybody deals with stuff, right? But at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge it. It is impacting all of us. We don't leave ourselves at home. So, I start to look at this and I start to think to myself, all right, so Ryan, Senior Nolin, I'll throw this one to you. Like, can you help us? Like, what metrics should we be tracking, right? If we can somewhat tie it to what Reed's saying, where there's a financial component, we know that they do care about operations, right? As organizations, we all care about each other and our humanity. I think we do better at that at times than others, but Nolan, like what is the number that we should be tracking? Like, how do we measure any of this? Is Nolan frozen?
He is dead frozen.
Right.
Oh,
we lost him. Okay. Yeah. So anyone else jump in there. So we'll get him back.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, please.
From that employer standpoint, it goes back to some things that you've each referenced, and that is we need to get talking about this more. In the same way that breast cancer awareness has women talking a lot more about breast cancer screening, it's taken decades for that to have that kind of effect. Movember has men talking about men's physical health and mental health. It takes years for that to actually change people who were raised saying you don't talk about this. But when you look at the stats, more than half of our workforce today is millennials and younger. And when you look at what the boomers, hey, if you're a boomer owner of a business, you might be able to ride this out and ignore it and sell off your business and be fine. If you're an Xer, you better learn to be able to discuss this, because like you said, Dennis, too many people that you approach, they just change the subject and walk away. They can't even say, I've considered this, I've investigated it, it's not an issue inside our company. And yet so there's a survey that was just done this last week, and it said that boomers, 1 out of 2 of them say their mental and emotional health is very good or excellent. For those of us that are in the middle generations, it's 1 out of 3 of us say that it's excellent or very good. And it's 1 out of 4 in those that are Gen Z. These are the people we're hiring into our companies. These are people who are very different than us about being open for it. And I think it's a matter of learn from them on their openness to be able to talk about and to be able to express frustration versus anxiety versus fear. I'd like to hear from Dr. Mehra. When you're dealing with, are you seeing this play out in the clients you deal with, that younger people can talk more extensively about what they're actually going through and feeling than us that are older generation?
Yes, so thank you. Great question. The short answer is yes, they are more willing to talk about it. The longer answer is coming out of the pandemic, it's become trendy to talk about it.
Yes.
And the pendulum in many ways, this is where we are realistically, we're dealing with. Yes, in some ways, the stigma, and you really even have to define the stigma. The stigma for myself is the inability for one human to share with another human way before we go to therapy and psychiatry is, hey, I'm just struggling. You know, my kid is just driving me crazy and stuff. What suggestions do you have? My neighbor, my churchgoer, being vulnerable with someone else that you're struggling. Now, the challenge is that the younger group is going the other way on that, and then we're going into this domain of mental health days. I, Rahul Mehra, am not a supporter of mental health days. You know, it is inappropriately viewed that anxiety or stress is a bad thing. Anxiety is a good thing. You know, if you've got to get up and perform and give a report to your CEO or your boss and things, you can't kind of shy away from that, but that's being coddled and stuff. No, I really need a mental health day. No, you need to be at work and it's okay. It's really still a fine line for employers to navigate that. And my suggestion is words are very important. The term mental health means so many different things. Reed, you mentioned breast cancer. The beauty of breast cancer, as horrible as it is that at least it's tangible, right? The phrase mental health, walking into a group of CEOs and you start talking about mental health, this is my experience, about 50% are going to check out. They don't really want it. They want to hear about productivity and performance. Now, if you talk about stress, hey, are your employees stressed? Yeah, they might be a different conversation. And to what Ryan said earlier about performance, that is the way I think that engaging employers and decision makers is talking about performance. And Reed, you're spot on about the impact on disability, PTO, and those kinds of things. That is not really directly understood to this day, that people are struggling with psychosocial issues. They're not all going to jump in and wanting to go see a therapist for multiple different reasons. And things, but we do have to normalize those conversations with each other, and those with each other happens not only in places of employment, but in churches, social clubs, and many other situations.
We were in a lot more clubs prior, right? So sorry, Ryan, I'll come right back to you because I definitely want you to weigh in on this. That addiction recovery group that I led, everyone who came in, their addiction might be different, but the pattern of stress, anxiety, stop eating properly, stop working out, stop sleeping, everything after sleeping was bad, like addiction, self-medication, right? And that pattern is consistent as the day is long, right? So, and I think what we saw frequently, what I learned just through observation over 3 years was, you could drain the swamp. The alcoholics would say, we could drain the swamp, but if you didn't deal with the alligators and snakes at the bottom of the swamp, you were going to find something else to fill the swamp, right? So that's the reaction, going down that road again happens frequently. So from your seat, Ryan, how have you gotten people to move the needle? I know you're very active in your organization. You've brought men together and had some of these conversations. So where have you seen some of the most positive, and what should we be doing?
Well, I want to go back and touch on something that Dr. Mehra said, because I think it is so profound. So Reed started off with a stat talking about that, 1 in 2 boomers admit that they have a mental health issue. They're just liars, right? I mean, just outright, just lying, because they were brought up in a generation that we just didn't address that. Get up, dust myself off, and try again. On the other side of things, when Dr. Mehra talked about the fact that there's this there's these poor assumptions, there's a mishandling. I'm using these words, he did not. So back in 2018, there was a book written by Jonathan Haidt, I think was his name, called The Coddling of the American Mind. This is pre-COVID. And two of the great untruths they talked about, one was the untruth of fragility, meaning that people are inherently fragile and they need protection from challenging ideas. And the other one was the untruth of emotional reasoning, meaning that we should always trust our feelings and prioritize emotional reason. So the millennial generation and younger, and I'm not trying to demonize them either, but they were brought up into a culture that we're not given the tools to handle the regular anxiety and stress of life. Like, give me a break. Somebody cut you off. It doesn't ruin your day. You don't need a mental health day. And so I think, again, this brings about, now to answer your question, Dennis, like on both sides of the spectrum and all the way throughout, we are missing the tools to understand how to deal with everything that life is throwing at us that could potentially set off our ability or inability to handle the mental stress, struggle, and anguish that we deal with every single day. And so it's ironic to me that we are in an industry of innovators that realize we have been diagnosing symptoms for far too long and we're not understanding the root cause of a medical issue. For you to walk into a doctor with a knee pain and for them to say, hey, let me just give you a shot of cortisone, go away. You're like, bro, I could have a bad back that's pulling on my knee. Are you really just going to give me a shot? Like, nobody wants to do that anymore. At the same time, with mental health, any bit of conversation that we're having is all around how to treat the issue. We are not talking about how to proactively educate people on how to navigate life, because to Dr. Mehra's point, so much of what we're dealing with is life. And so I think that, like, that's one of the things that I stress more than anything. It's like, life sucks. Like, if you read the Bible, Jesus was clear. In this world, you will have tribulation. This wasn't an option. This is an emphatic thing that he says. And so I think that that's the first thing that we need to do, is we need to equip ourselves with tools. And that's what we try to do, is equip people with the tools to say, like, yes, life sucks. Yes, I'm going to deal with challenging things. Sometimes it is traumatic, but I need an objective voice to help me navigate whether or not it's real trauma or I'm just a sensitive sissy. And again, sorry to overdo that, but we need to be able to do that. And so I think, again, that's where this conversation, not us, but generally speaking, we are massively missing the gap. Before you start to experience the breakdown, before you need to start taking days off, we need to have education around my identity, the struggles that I am prone to dealing with, the real true traumatic life events that I have, how to navigate those things. And so think about it as an employer, and then I'm going to be quiet. If you were to give your team, the day they're hired, I give my team members and I instruct my clients to give their team members The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Covey. I think it's one of the best books on human performance that exists forever. But think about if we had 1 or 2 resources to proactively give our employees to go read about how to navigate life's challenges, whether you're dealing with them or not. I mean, that would be an incredible employee gift that we could be giving to people to help ingrain into them that, like, this is the culture. We talk about the stuff beforehand. We want to help you address it. We want to help you stress or step through it because we want you to perform at your best, not just for your work, but for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I would echo that entirely, because when I was really questioning Doc, and this was in 2018, 2019, we were doing a lot of the Rosetta stuff. There was a lot on the opioids, right? We hosted a big event here, and Rosetta came in. It was about the opioid crisis, and that's when I got introduced to Doc. He was trying to keep athletes from dealing with opioids, right? With some of the work he's done with universities and athletes, and that's what started the conversation. And it ultimately, I said, help me figure out, like, what should we be doing? And I sort of itemized it for my clients very simply. We need to educate way more, because we don't know what we don't know, right? As parents, kids don't come with a manual. I don't know how to deal with postpartum depression when somebody in my family has a baby and all I want to do is snuggle the baby and the mom's having a really bad moment. That was something we dealt with. Addiction and depression, those things have all been and family. What really was the catalyst for me, I think many of you have heard me tell this story. I think during COVID, one of the Ben talks that I did for Ben Pro was really about Jack and the loss of Jack in 2020 to suicide at 13 years old. That's where I finally said, all right, Doc, I don't know what to tell Jack's father, Paul. Like, help me navigate this a little bit. Like, what is the answer? Like, what can we do? So it was education of things that we just don't know that we don't know. And so exposing people to that on a frequency basis, right? Almost like going to church, right? And the Bible hadn't changed a whole lot, but we forget the stuff that's in it that's really helpful. And we need those reminders on a regular basis, right? And then the second piece is we need that access to care. We need it quickly, right? So Reed, to your point, with what you guys are doing, you provide a great telepsych, teletherapy that's easy to access, and you give people the card still, right? It's not gone all digital. I know most of your clients love that piece. So that's the second component. And the third component is really what I'm trying to solve for my clients is, I'm like, guys, there's a tsunami of issues coming. There's not enough therapists on the planet. If you just try and treat just downtown Tampa, if you bring all the therapists here for a million reasons, that's not the solution. And so I want the right people in therapy, because a lot of people do have some significant trauma that I'll never fully understand. And that's not going to be solved by going and taking a walk in the park with my buddy, right? But a lot of the things I did learn through that addiction recovery program is that some of the simplest things are some of the answers, right? I don't want to disparage any therapist, but I think some of the answers are very simple things, and they're free and they're easy to access, and they don't have any barrier to entry. And they're not waiting for a guy like Dennis to say, hey, I need to go register and find a therapist and all the challenges that come with that. There are a lot of things that I do that solve for my mental health. I think with our kids, I think you made a really great comment, Ryan. I constantly remind my son and my son's mother that, hey, don't steal the struggle. Like, let him go figure it out, right? Show him, guide him, support him. If he falls down, I love taking him to the skate park, because when he falls down and eats it really hard, everybody around him cheers him on and says, you can do it. And he tries again, right? I think there's a huge value to that for our youth, but we tend to steal the struggle, and we want it to be easier for our kids than it was for us. And I don't know if that's really helped us. So if you could implement like one proactive solution nationwide, right? If there was a genie that you could say, hey, if we could do this, I think we could get more attention on the prevention side, is really one of my goals in life. And to what Doc says, we need to create this public health policy around prevention, right? There's a lot of things that we teach our kids with helmets and with brushing our teeth, and we don't put kids in cars without seatbelts now, but that same knowledge doesn't exist as tools, Ryan, to your point on the mental health front. So if you could wave a magic wand, what would the strategy be? What would you implement from your seat? And I'll go to you, Nolin, since we lost you for a minute.
Yeah, sorry, power cut off in the house, so
problem.
we're back and rocking. But maybe a little bit biased, but I mentioned that I came to mind because I thought what they were doing was innovative. What they were doing was reaching people that previously weren't getting the help. What we've done is kind of alleviated the stigma piece. This is daily engagement. It is for those people that are not at that severe level of anxiety and depression, and helps them and trains them on the tools that work for them on an individual level. So I would say mine, but beyond that, I really think we've talked a lot about empathy. I think that low-hanging fruit for organizations to address this and be better on the preventative side is to deploy unwavering empathy within their culture. And that this needs to be something that we can talk about. Dennis, I know you mentioned there are folks that'll stutter, or they'll try and change the conversation. And there's 1,000 reasons why that might be, right? They don't understand it themselves, or it's just an uncomfortable topic. And I think as a society, we just need to constantly deploy empathy and get comfortable talking about these things. And because we know, right? Well, we were talking about this before, whether you know it or whether you're talking about it or not, we know these things are occurring at scale. We talked about there's never been more prescriptions written. There's never been more numbers of therapy sessions completed. It's amazing on the therapy side, stuff like what Reed is doing, and improvement to access is critical. But if all these things are getting better and we're not even seeing the mental health crisis plateauing, it's still getting worse. Like we're missing something. And I think empathy is a huge piece to that.
All right,
The-
Reed, what do you think?
oh,
And that's,
sorry.
sorry, Doc, I'm gonna come back to you because I want you to share Care Champion. I think is a great piece of this. So, but Reed, go ahead. Any thoughts from your standpoint?
Well, I'm supposed to reference the thing that we do day in and day out every day, and that is um, getting rid of the barriers for members that when they are ready to actually deal with an issue, that we can get them um, a fast visit in less than a week at no cost to them and get them the treatment when they need it. But I'm loving this conversation that Ryan started, which is referencing the preventive is a different level of education. And I have been a uh, 40-year believer that all of the great wisdom is written down in books and it's right there for you if you want to go and find it. And there is such great advice on how to get through this thing called life. And everybody should go to school on their own and study how to work your life better. And so maybe it would be that library that basically everybody in my sphere of influence knows I'm a reader and I talk about the best books. And that's what Ryan referenced. I think that would do more to actually help on the preventive.
All right, Miller, do you want to weigh in on, because I love your approach. It's a real world, real life. Your tool's very simple in the book. I think it's impactful. So, what do you tell the guys that you're around? Because you do draw in a crowd that, I think they probably don't realize they're struggling with stuff, but they are struggling and it's holding them back. How do you navigate some of that for them or with them?
Yeah. So most people are probably familiar with the organization Stitch Fix. They were the subscription, kind of one of the first subscription-based clothing models, styling models for women. And there's a fascinating story about the CEO. She got pregnant and in the middle of early years of that business scaling at an incredible rate. And they had an unlimited PTO policy. They were primarily female employed. And they also had this incredible maternity leave policy that she realized people weren't taking. So she decided that she was going to set the example, and she took 6 months off from running that company. For like 3 of those months, at a time when that company was desperately needing her leadership to scale and grow and take money, she stepped away and didn't even check an email. And you can go verify this whole story for like the exact timeline here. That to me is the example that you need to set for your employees if you want your employees to take maternity leave and truly go care for your babies. The same thing applies in this space. I would love to see leaders like Reed is talking about, and I know like Reed does. I know Reed well enough to know like he models this for his team. Normalize being vulnerable. Stop pretending that as the CEO, the CFO, whatever you are, you're the sales manager, that you don't deal with day-to-day bullshit too. I don't even know if I'm allowed to cuss, but I just did. Like, it's so frustrating to me because it's like these executives come out, they're all polished, and they're like, look it, I know you guys have struggles. Pat you on the head. And when you deal with them, we've got all the resources available to you. I'm like, dude, you're struggling with the same stuff, or like you said, Dennis, some version of it that's one way or another. So if executives owned their own stories, they owned their own struggles, and without oversharing, if they were willing to communicate that to their team on a regular basis, we would start to see vulnerability mimicked. Because if leaders can't talk about their wounds, they can't talk about their struggles, then their teams will continue to bleed in private the way that they are. And that's exactly why I do what I do. This sounds overly cocky, and it is not at all. The only reason why I am as public about this kind of stuff as I am is because I believed that in my circle, nobody else had the balls to do it. And so I just felt like I'm going to go first. I'm going to put myself out there. And as I have, like, dude, you talk to a guy like Bryce Heinbaugh, who's in our business too. He is doing tremendous things for healthcare. I mean, incredible work. That guy is one of the most vulnerable people to talk about the challenges at times he's had in his marriage, his own mental health battles, and the community that he has drawn to himself as the result of just being vulnerable internally on his team, but then as influenced in the community around is phenomenal. So that is what that is the genie lamp. Like if executive leaders would just have the wisdom, the chutzpah to start going first, I think that they would see culture shifts in their organization and their circles like we've never seen before.
Yeah, it's a secret that I learned in those addiction recovery meetings is everyone walking in there thought they were special. They thought they were the only ones dealing with that problem. And
Yep.
and it didn't take long before the power of that community, they realized they're not. And I think it's important to understand that being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean weak, right? You can still be, Ryan, I think you're vulnerable, but I don't see you as a weak person, right? And so, but we all have our moments, right? Life goes up and down, right? It's sometimes I'm better and some days I'm not, right? So some days stress levels are through the roof and I don't respond as effectively as I'd like. And so, I think you guys have all hit on things
Can I just say
that,
one more thing real quick?
yeah, hit
And
it.
that, like, weakness is okay. I think that's the other thing that we're really, really, really struggling with here. I am weak. Like physically, I have strong days, but I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing. Like the more powerful we get into positions of influence in an organization or an industry or on social media, we start to pretend like we are stronger than we are. Like all of a sudden the weakness goes away. That is garbage. I struggle. I have moments, days, weeks, months, years of weakness. I need people to walk through this journey with me or I will crumble. And so I just want to qualify that by saying, like, for me, I am weak. And I'm not saying that to say that. Like, I need other people to strengthen me because I can't do this on my own.
Yeah, we can't be perfect in all areas at all times, right? It's impossible. And that's muscles don't grow by not being worked, right? So I say this all the time. We don't gain a ton of weight overnight. We don't lose it overnight, right? We don't get to a bad headspace overnight. We're probably not going to come out of it overnight. But the thing that I definitely learned the most by working with Dr. Mehra is that there's a lot of simple things that honestly I took for granted, right? There are a lot of very simple answers to some of this. So Doc, the education piece, I think your peer champion community is probably encapsulating a lot of what I see doesn't happen in the market. So I definitely wanted you on to share some of that. So can you just share kind of some of your insights around that? And I know we're running short on time, so I wanted to make sure you could help us. And I'll come back to each one of you with a closing thought before we shut the recording down.
Certainly. I will come to that in a second if I can, because I didn't really go into the details of the emotional vaccine. So it really encapsulates what my fellow panelists have said about education, kindness, empathy is what is that can be scalable. So that's what emotional vaccines represent. We're just 2 to 3 minute micro educational videos that talk about everyday life challenges every human on this earth goes through, giving them practical, actionable steps to mitigate those life challenges from becoming more complex issues later in life. Certainly, there are specific traumas that are very unique that individuals go through. This doesn't mean that emotional vaccines is a cure-all by any means, but it is very foundational. And I also want to educate our viewers is that the word prevention is used very loosely. What is unknown is that there's 4 different levels of prevention. When you hear that a suicide prevention month, that is usually talking about tertiary prevention. There's primordial, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And primordial and primary involve education. That's what emotional vaccines represent. That is easily scalable in any type of situation, employers, social clubs. To Dennis's question about Care Champion Community, that is a 1-hour training that we have created. Each letter stands for, C stands for culture, A stands for assessment, R stands for resources, E for empathy. What happens with those is that each letter we show a brief video on culture, whatever that means. And then it means a lot of different things. And I actually talk about that in my video. And then we have a open discussion with the attendees. And the essence of that is really to, as Ryan says, to start normalizing those conversations. And yes, we all know that the culture has got to start at the top, but it can start at the top, but also starts needing to change at the bottom as well, because that reluctance to be vulnerable, to normalize that, is exactly what's needed. And that's what that represents, something that can be easily scalable.
And I know a little bit about it just because part of this stuff has evolved out of me answering and trying to figure out what am I going to do for my clients, right? I have the question in here, whose responsibility is it? And I'm not a big fan of shying away from the problem, even though things are complicated at times. I don't know that I can always fix things, but I'm thinking I can do something, right? So I love Dr. Mears' emotional vaccines. We've used those a lot. I love the fact that he's looking at taking that care champion and creating a scenario where Ryan can take and create his own community where he's at and use content that we can trust, right? Because I don't know that everything we see out there in video we can trust. So I love that concept because I see that as scalable and just helping people understand that we don't know what we don't know and how do we learn more about it. So I'll take the last round robin. We'll go and just ask each one of you, what are your closing thoughts? What do you want the community at large to know that maybe we didn't touch on so we can wrap up in a timely fashion? So I'll start with you, Senor Nolin. We didn't get as much from you, and I think your product is something people need to look closer at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, hopefully this is one of many conversations. I think, these types of gatherings are what needs to be happening and a step in the right direction. To self-promote, again, like I encourage anybody to reach out to learn more about Mind. I think we're doing a lot of very innovative things in the mental health space that's not being done. Outcomes-based pricing, wearables, AI. I think it's an exciting program, and I would just encourage everybody, coming out of today, kind of just to take stock, right? Where's your organization at from a culture standpoint? What are you hearing and seeing across your workforce? And if you're having a hard time, as a director of HR, to bring this back to your leadership and your CFO, like, reach out, because there's a lot of folks that will be able to help.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I'm going to drop contact info into the chat and we'll send out the video as well. So Reed, we'll come to you. Any closing thoughts?
Well, for benefits consultants and employers, I would say get great at talking about this, because not talking about it isn't helping anything. For the members, don't look to your employer to be the only place to solve this. This is your responsibility. Take ownership of your life.
That's great. Senor Miller.
Oh man, I guess I would just say, like, we have to stop pretending that this doesn't exist in ourselves. I think this is one of the hardest things that we have to tackle as individuals, because it's shameful, it's confusing, it's frustrating, it's hurtful. But if we are each individually willing to go first and create that culture of influence around us, I think we can start to affect a change like we never have before. But if we think that we are not subject to this challenge, but we're going to go out and solve it for other people, I think we're going to be a bunch of unrelatable people spewing information that people won't really care about.
I agree. Thank you. Doc, any final thoughts?
Well, number one, thank you, Dennis, for getting all of us together. It's been a very powerful conversation. So I have to be true to what emotional vaccines represent, and that is education. We didn't really get too much in the topic about youth and kids, because that's what I'm really passionate about, is just an educational fact. When someone is formally diagnosed in adulthood with a psychiatric condition, 50% of the time, 50, symptoms or issues have appeared by age 14, and 80% of the time by age 24. And Dennis, what you mentioned earlier, the statistic that by the time symptoms present to the time there's formal help, 11 years go by, that has a profound ramification on the severity of symptoms, on the responsiveness to treatment and intervention, and the correlation to the mind-body health. It puts individuals statistically at greater risk for physical health conditions. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that I love that Doc says is that we are the line of first defense. Like, Ryan is going to notice a friend who's exhibiting symptoms long before that friend's probably ever going to seek treatment. So trying to educate the population that's around us has been and becoming a bigger and bigger part of my goal. I mean, my role as an insurance advisor, and certainly I've been in the career a long time, and I've been independent, and I've been now part of a massive organization with HUB. I'm so blessed to have these people that are put in my path. In fact, part of my conversation with Ryan is that I reached out because I said, I got a book in my mind, and it's about the people that God puts in our path, right? I don't know that I always know what to do, but I know that if I'm presented with a situation and an opportunity that I think I can impact in a positive way, I am obligated to my maker to go figure out a way to make that work. And today's conversation was a little bit around that, hey, I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I've been able to figure out a whole bunch. The fact that I'm becoming one of the experts in this arena doesn't speak a whole lot about our industry, right? I'm just out trying to figure it out, and I'm showing up. But at the end of the day, I would encourage our community and my peers to get better at this, because we are losing people. People are dying. It is only going to be a moment before it's somebody very close to you. And if you didn't step up and do what you needed to do, or do at least what you thought you could do, I believe you're going to regret that. I will not meet my maker and say, I regretted that I didn't do more. I'm doing everything that I can reasonably do. And I just so much appreciate the community around me and the guys that are around me and the influences around me, which does include a lot of incredible women, by the way. They're brilliant. That's actually some of the smarter people in my life. But I've got friends I can go to and I can talk to. And I believe that is a piece of the answer. We need the therapy. We need the reads to go hold the therapists and the telepsych companies accountable for doing a good job, because our clients deserve it, right? We need the Bryce Heimballs to put it out there and be changes and agents for change. He was a leader that certainly I paid close attention to when I really started going down some of these roads. This mental health piece, I think, is just not something. No one's talking about prevention, and I'm just sick of it. And I'm like, well, Dennis, what are you going to do about it? This is what we're doing about it. So we'll continue the dialogue.